You know, one of the questions I've really wrestled with that someone asked me is, why do we gather? Why do we put so much effort into gathering together? Why do we talk about, hey, we want you to be a part of an online community? This is why we speak into that situation. Why do we gather in small groups? Why do we gather in large groups? Did we switch everything from, to online for a period of time, just encouraging people to gather together? And why do we make the transition to say, hey, we're going to continue online, but we're also going to do in-person gathering? Why? And the reason is because we are stronger together. That's why we gather. Come on, we're stronger together. That's why we gather. There's a biblical principle, spiritual principle that the Bible talks about all throughout Scripture, that God created you to develop and live in relationship with Him, but also live in a relationship with others. The two feed off each other. The more that I follow God and pursue Him, the more that God calls me to love and pursue relationships with other people, because we're better when we come together to be a part of it. And so this is why God created you for community. And I want you to begin to see this, the power of this, and why this is so necessary, especially in the day in which we're living in. In our current environment, social distancing has become social isolation, that so many people are living in fear, and when fear begins to grip you, you have a tendency to run and to live in isolation, and it's in the isolation that you start experiencing more depression, more sadness, more anxiety. It feeds off each other. And I believe today's going to be a breakthrough for you. I believe that today God's going to lay upon your heart a principle through the power of His Word and through the Spirit of the living God that's going to begin to resurrect within you hope and joy, and begin to develop within you a faith that will begin to show you the goodness of who God is so that you can do the impossible. I believe that for you. And so in order to do that, I want to turn to a passage that is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. It's found in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 14 is where we're going to be at. And it talks about a situation where the people of God were actually living in fear. And because of that fear, it pushed them to live in isolation. King Saul was the king at this time, and he wasn't listening to God. He wasn't obeying God. He wasn't following God. And so because of that, when your relationship with God unravels, every other relationship and every other thing in your life unravels. Everything. That's why it's so dependent that you trust in God and live for Him and pursue Him. But Saul wasn't pursuing God. He was not honoring God. He was not living for God. And because of that, everything was falling apart. And that allowed the Philistine army to surround the people of God. And so as soon as they saw the Philistines, they got freaked out and scared. In fact, Samuel writing this says in chapter 13 that they were looking for caves just to hide in because they couldn't take it anymore. And this is why this is so prevalent and I think so applicable to where we're at. Because so many of us are just living in isolation. So many of us are living in loneliness. But before COVID ever started, a statistic came out that said 50% of Americans confess that they struggle with constant loneliness. That is not what God wants for your life. God doesn't want you to live in loneliness. He brought you into relationship with Him and also to bring you into relationship with others. And that's from that, it flows together. And so how can we begin to break out of this? And what does God want us to learn about the power of community, the power of gathering? Why is it that we are stronger together? That's why we gather. And this is where this text becomes so alive to me. And I pray that God will make it alive to you. And God will begin to do incredible things through it. And so will you just join me in prayer right now before we jump into the text? Lord, I believe you have a word for us. And so Spirit of the living God, would you give me ears to hear what you want to speak to me? Would you give me a heart that begins to beat for you? And Lord, I pray for all those right now, God, who are living in incredible loneliness. God, for some, they're in marriages surrounded by people, yet they're still lonely. God, for some, they're single and they have a bunch of friends, but yet they don't feel like anyone loves them. For so many are just going through life right now in a bondage of loneliness, and that loneliness is turning them to addiction, to struggles, for something to find to escape. But I pray right now, God, I pray a miracle will begin to fall. I pray that, God, you would begin to stir affections for you. Spirit of the living God, have your way right here, right now among us. And will you just pray that to God? Spirit, have your way. I invite you into my life. I invite you into the space that I'm in. God, begin to move with power. God, show me why I was made for community with you and community with others. In the name of Christ we pray, and God's people just shout, come on, amen. Amen. 1 Samuel chapter 14. The story begins, King Saul is just sitting there and he has a son named Jonathan, and Jonathan is just fed up. And it says in this, verse 1, it said, one day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor bearer, come on, let's go. I'm tired of this. There comes a point in your life where God will begin to intersect and invade your life and say, hey, do you really want to stay where you're at? Do you really want to stay in this brokenness? Do you really want to stay in this addiction? Do you really want to stay just kind of breathing through life? Or do you want to live the life that I've come to give you? Jesus came to give you a life, and not just life, but abundant life. And I believe that for you. I believe that God wants to bring breakthrough in your life. I believe that God wants to bring blessing to your life. I believe that God wants to bring goodness to your life. I believe He wants to manifest His presence in every aspect of your life. I believe that for you. But in order to get there, you're going to have to leave the place where you're at. There has to be a discomfort, something where God begins to say, hey, are you tired of staying here? And Jonathan rose up and says, I'm tired of everybody acting in fear. I'm tired of everybody freaking out and running in loneliness. I'm tired of the depression. I'm tired of this. Let's go. Let's go. Somebody shout, let's go. Let's go. So he says, come on, let's go. Let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side. And so they get up and they begin to go. And it says, but he did not tell his father. He didn't share with his dad. So Saul was staying on the outskirts of Geba under a pomegranate tree in Migron. And with him were about 600 men. The people who should be fighting are not fighting. They're living in isolation and fear and depression and worry. And among whom was also Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He's the priest. He was the son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. And no one was aware that Jonathan had left. Now, why is that? Because when you live in isolation, when you live in fear, one of the things that begins to happen is you only focus on you. You only worry about you. You're only concerned about you. That you never really focus on other people because you're just focused on you. This is why there's so much rage going on in society right now, is because no one is caring for anybody else. It's about, what about me? I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. That's not how God created you. No one was caring about Jonathan because everybody was consumed on themselves. And so it says, keep going, verse 4. It says, so they went down, and on each side of the pass, as they begin to go forward, on each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross, notice the word intended, so he has this inspiration. He says, let's go. They begin to walk towards it. They intend to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. Whoa, I thought when you follow God and God begins to spur something in your life, a dream, a vision, a purpose, it should be easy. No, it's never easy. You're going to understand, and one of the things you have to realize about faith is every time God begins to call you to move, He's going to move you out of what is comfortable, and there's going to be a cliff. There's going to be an obstacle that is in front of you. It's a test. And so there was a cliff, and one was named Bozez. That means slippery. So on one side was Bozez, slippery. On the other side was Sinai. That means thorny. And so here's my man Jonathan, turns to his armor bearer, says, let's go. They begin to go. They're all fired up. Come on, let's go, let's go. And as soon as they begin to walk by faith, they notice, hold on, there's a cliff of where we need to be, and there's the thorny side and the slippery side. This isn't going to be easy. Whoever told you that following God was going to be easy, they lied to you. As you begin to follow God, it's going to get hard. It's going to get tough. It's going to be a struggle. And so Jonathan looks at it and he goes, wow. On one side of the cliff stood, the north side was towards Michmash, and on the other to the south was towards Geba. They had the inspiration to start. Now they're looking at the cliff going, I don't know. And Jonathan said to his young armor bearer once again, come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Now he's talking some smack. Uncircumcised, some religious smack talk. He says, let's go over to those people who don't believe in God, who are rebelling against God, who are saying that our God is not good and our God does not exist, that our God is not powerful. Let's go over there and tell them about it. I mean, he has faith. But then the next word is where I so many times live in my life. Come on, God, you are for me. You're going to do this. This is going to be incredible. I get this inspiration. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. But then perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. That doesn't sound very certain, does it? Come on, let's go. But the more that I see the difficulty, perhaps it can't happen. But perhaps I'll always be single. Perhaps I'll always be stuck in my addiction. Perhaps I'll never find another job. Perhaps I'll always be sick. Perhaps I'll never find healing. Perhaps I'll never recover. Perhaps I will never laugh again, smile again. Perhaps I'll never be joyful again. I'll always live in this depression, this fear, this worry. Perhaps. You see, Jonathan had this incredible faith in his armor bearer, and they were ready to go, but then they saw the obstacle. And they begin to doubt. They begin to wonder, perhaps, maybe, perhaps. He's uncertain. But I love that there's this battle waging in his side of him, because as soon as he says that, he does know this. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Nothing can stop God. He can do the impossible. God can deliver us, whether it's just me and you, my armor bearer friend, or whether we have all the armies of Israelites behind us. God's got this. He can move. But he's looking at the situation and he knows what he needs to do. He knows where he needs to go. But at the moment he's looking at it and it seems too impossible. He seems that, I don't know, can God really show up? Can God really deliver me? Does God really want to do this in my life? Perhaps. And it's in this moment, he just perhaps. But look what happens. The armor bearer turns around and he says, do all that you have in mind. Come on. Don't stop here. Don't stop here. Do all that you have in mind, as armor bearer said. Go ahead. I am with you in heart and soul. I'm with you. If you're with somebody, just turn to them and say, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. I know what we're going through is hard. I know what we're going through is tough. But what you're going through, you are not alone. I'm with you. I'm with you. Listen, no matter where you're watching this at, no matter where you're interacting with this at, no matter if you're in our in-person gathering or whether you're watching online, I want you to hear this. We're in this together. I'm with you. God is with you. The family of God is with you. This is why the journey, we are a family. We are a people of faith. We're in this together. Turn to somebody and say, I'm in this with you. Come on. I'm in this with you. You're not alone. And I believe that God prophetically wants to speak that into your life because you've been thinking, I'm all alone. I'm all alone. I'm all alone. And God says, you're not alone. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening to this message, because I have a purpose for you to speak into your situation. And so the armor bearer says, come on, Jonathan, you're not by yourself. We're in this together. And yes, it's going to be hard. And yes, it's going to be tough, but we're in this together and God is with us. And that gives my man Jonathan, that gets him some swagger back. Now he's going, whoa, I'm lifting my head up. I'm getting a little excited. Faith is growing within me a little bit. So Jonathan says, well, come on then. Ooh, come on then. Come on then. Just shout, well, come on then. If we have God and he's with us and we have each other, we're in this together. That's why we gather. We're stronger. Come on then. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Would you just shout the title of my message? Let's go. Let's go. I believe that for you. But I want you to see the situation they're in, because I believe the principles we're going to learn here are so powerful. Everybody wants to live with faith. You know, it's the reason you're watching, the reason you come to one of our services, the reason why you took a step, because you said, God, I want you to move. I want you to move in my life. And so many times we think faith, though, is going to be easy. Faith is never easy. The reason why faith is never easy is because the only way that faith can grow is that God has to place you in situations that are out of your control. And to be honest, I never like being in situations where I feel out of control. But the faith that I need is the type of faith that prevails even when my plans and my purposes that I have for my life do not prevail. I need the type of faith that shows up when things are falling apart. I need the type of faith when everything I thought was being held together is all of a sudden being fallen apart. I need the type of faith that looks and says, well, let's go. And then where I get where I need to be goes, wow, this is going to be slippery. This is going to be thorny. This is going to be hard. I need the type of faith that continues to go forward. And the only way that God could ever teach you faith, the only way that God could ever grow your faith is he has to bring you to this point. God will always bring you to this cliff. He'll always bring you to this point, because he wants you to learn how to trust in him and how you can really grow in faith. And so how do you do that? How do you really begin? If that's where faith grows, how does faith begin to grow? And this is where the story comes alive. The faith didn't grow just in absence. You had Jonathan and his armor bearer, and because of them both coming together, it gave them the ability to keep going forward when they wanted to stop. You see, faith grows. Faith grows. Write this down. Faith grows through influence. God brings you to uncertainty. And he created you to move within uncertainty, to live by faith. But he says, I'm not going to leave you alone. I created you to fight this, to walk this with other people. I've created this so that other people can influence you, can encourage you all along this route. This is why it's so incredible. Samuel's writing this to us, and he says that Jonathan did not tell his dad. Now, I have 4 kids, so I'm usually always telling my kids, hey, make sure you tell your dad everything. I want to hear everything. But Jonathan here says, I'm not going to tell my dad. Now, why is he doing that? He's not rebelling. What he's doing is he knows the mind frame that his dad is in, Saul. He knows that Saul is already believed in his heart that he's powerless. He's already given up the battle before the battle was ever waged. He's looking at the circumstance, and fear is saying to him, it can't happen. Nothing will ever change. You're just stuck here. You're just lonely. Nothing will ever go forward. Nothing will ever be better. And because of that, he's pointing out everything that could go wrong, that might go wrong. Well, this is going to go wrong, and this is why we can't do it, and this is why we can't do it. And so Jonathan gets so fed up with that. He says, I'm done. Let's go. But I'm not going to go to my dad, because I know that if I went to my dad, that God is stirring something within me. God is saying, you can't stay here. You can't stay stuck here. If I went and I talked to my dad about that, my dad would just influence me to discourage me so I would never take a step of faith. Listen, so many of the time, so many of the purposes God has within you, so many of the divine moments that God has created for you, so many times that inspiration where God plants into your heart, it dies because you turn to the wrong people. You turn to people who are not living by faith. You turn to people who are motivated by fear. You turn to people who are influencing you down a path and down a direction that is never going to live in the goodness and the power and the glory that God has for you. This is where Jonathan is at. He says, I don't want to stay here. So he turns to the only person that actually has faith, and that's his armor bearer. And they begin to influence others. They begin to speak into each other. You see, faith is contagious, but so is fear. Both of them are contagious. The question is, who are you going to listen to? What are you going to allow to fill your own mind? Who are you going to open your ears to? And this is so powerful. You have to understand this concept, because you can't control who you come into contact with. It's the reason why we wear a mask. It's the reason why we social distance. You can't control who you come in contact with. You can't control the family you were born in. You can't control those situations. But what you can control is who you allow into your life to influence you. You see, just because they're connected with me doesn't mean I have to open my ears to listen to them. I can choose who I'm going to associate with and who I'm going to allow deep into my life to begin influencing me. If you want to know the projection of your life, take inventory of who you're hanging out with. If you want to know where your life is going to end up, just take inventory. Where are the people I'm with? Where are they going? What are they dreaming of? What do they have vision of? What are they thinking of? What's in their heart? What is God moving and working in their heart? If there's not a sign of faith within them, then are those really the people you want to be influencing in your life? You're going to end up whoever you hang out with. See, wherever you want to go, wherever you're going in life, if you want to begin to change, if you really want to begin to leverage the power influence, you have to be very, very particular of who you open your ears to influence you. In my life, I come in contact with a lot of people. And there's a lot of people I love. There's a lot of people I encourage. There's a lot of people that I pour into. But the reality is there's a very tight circle around me who I allow to influence me, to speak into me. But when they speak, I listen, because I believe that God has anointed them to encourage my faith to be the man of God that I need to be. This is why we gather. And so this is why we come and we encourage you. Hey, if you come, we want you to participate. Whether you're online, we want you to participate online. That's why we want you to be in the chat. We want you to talk to people. We want you to connect with someone in live prayer. We want you to invite people with you as you feel comfortable to watch it with you. Because why? It doesn't matter if it's 2 or if it's 3,000. The question is, am I gathering with people to encourage me? Because faith is contagious. This is why we do in-person gatherings. This is why we say, hey, let's come together. Let's invite, let's come together. Let's sing loud. Let's encourage, because we want to encourage each other, because faith is so influential in our life, and it takes speaking faith to actually create that faith to grow in our life. This is what it's about. And so you can still live in social distancing. You can even live on saying, hey, I need to quarantine myself for a while. But that doesn't mean that you have to cut yourself off from the very influence that God wants to bring into your life. In fact, those are the moments you need people of faith the most in your life, who are speaking into you, who are coming alongside of you, because you're going to see the obstacle and you're going to go, okay, I know God can do it, but perhaps He doesn't want to do it for me. I know God is good, but perhaps He's not going to be good towards me. And you start feeding that and feeding that and feeding that and feeding that. Every time you start to move in the direction God is calling you to move, it's going to be hard. And who you turn to in that moment will determine whether you will go forward or whether you'll stay stuck where you're at. That's the power of influence. That's the power. Because whatever you begin to attract towards your life, whatever you begin to focus on and allow people to influence, that's what you're attracted to, and that's what begins to be attracted to you. This is why this is so beautiful. Because there's power influence, and if there's power influence, this means God's given us the faith choice to choose who we allow to influence us. And so the wisest thing that we can do then is leverage the influence that we allow into our lives. You don't have to be a genius to understand the concept of who you allow to influence you will ultimately direct you, and what you allow to influence you is what you'll begin to attract more of in your life. If you want to live in joy, it's going to be very hard being influenced by people who are always negative. If you want to live encouraging people, it's going to be very hard if all that surrounds you are people who gossip about other people and talk smack about other people all the time you're around. It's not going to happen. If you want to live in goodness, it's going to be very hard to live around people, allowing them to influence you who are full of hate. This is why it's so important. If you want to live in joy, if you want to live in peace, if you want to live in goodness, if you want to begin to live in faith, you surround yourself, you intentionally allow people into your life that you listen to, that speaks into you. Does that mean you cut off everybody else in your life? No, you still connect with them. But just because I connect with them doesn't mean that I give them permission to influence me. I intentionally have to surround myself with people who are going to contagiously speak faith into me so that it becomes contagious within me and I begin to live in the goodness of what God has for me. You have to leverage this. And so who are you allowing to influence you? Come on, who? Who are you allowing to speak by faith into your life? Who are you intentionally saying, I'm developing a relationship with them because they understand they are faith-filled people and they will come alongside of me and say, let's go. We're in this together. Let's go. Who are you doing that with? And then who are you using your influence to encourage? Who are you influencing? We'll say, oh, well, I just need people to influence me. Okay, start influencing other people too. And what you'll find is the people you begin to influence, God will begin to use to influence you. There are no perfect people. But is their heartbeat? Do they desire the things of God? Do they desire to pursue God? Do they desire to love more of Christ? Do they desire to pursue Christ and be filled with the Spirit? Do they desire those things? If they do, then begin to bring them into your life. This is why you have to be intentional about this. You have to be intentional. So many times in my life, this is my struggle. I get the inspiration. Let's go! But then I see the obstacle. And I go, perhaps. And I begin to doubt. I begin to worry. I begin to wonder. So many times I feel so schizophrenic in faith. I could stand before you and say, come on, let's go. And then the next day come in and go, oh, perhaps. I don't know. All this week I've been hit with news after news after news. At times it's just a struggle. And I was feeling so defeated, so struggling. I'm recalling to my mind, come on, I will be confident. I'm speaking the verse over my life over and over again. I will remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I'm prophesying that over my life. I'm living in the power of that. But yet, as I live in it, is in isolation though, it's hard to battle that battle. And I can't tell you, in those moments, I specifically make the step, hey, I need to call somebody. I need to talk with somebody. I need to get around some people who are going to speak some faith into me to help me in this situation. And what I found over and over in my life, that's what gives me the strength to keep going on when I want to give up. That's what gives me the strength. You see, if Jonathan did this on his own, I believe he would stand there, he would look and say, well, perhaps God isn't going to do anything. And unless that man, that armor bearer, come alongside him and said, come on, we can do this together, I think Jonathan would have turned around and never would have proceeded forward. I wonder how many of you, your dream, your inspiration, the things that God has planted in you is dying because you have no one to come alongside you and say, come on, let's do this together. This is the power of community. This is why we gather. In my life, the reason I found the courage to go forward when I want to give up is because I have people behind me going, God's got this. God's got this. When we started the journey, when Shane and I first started about praying about, is God leading us to partner with the journey? I felt so incompetent. I was like, God, how could you use me? There's no way. There's no way, Lord. I'm in my 20s. And God, who am I to stand and to lead a people, Lord, let alone a people who are in a church that are struggling, in a community that is struggling. God, I just don't know. And so many times I would doubt myself and doubt what God wanted to do through me. But it was through the voice of my wife who would say, come on, God's got this. It was the voice of Tim. Come on, God's got this. It was the voice of Thomas. God's got this. It was the voice of so many people that were so influential that I opened my ears to, that when I looked at all the obstacles, they looked at and said, if God is for us, who can stand against us? Come on, God can do this. That's what gave me the courage to keep going forward. Many times in my life, when I'm struggling loving my wife, come on, I struggle at times loving my wife. You might have a mystical marriage. You never talk about your struggles. I struggle at times loving my wife. I struggle being the husband I need to be. I struggle at times being the dad I need to be. I struggle. In those moments, I go, man, it just seems like it's thorny and slippery. I don't know if I can keep going. It's because people have come alongside of me and has given me incredible faith to say, God can do this through you. Come on, keep loving her, keep doing this. And reminded me, this week I made some decisions, and it's hard making decisions when you don't know what to do at times. And I'm this week making a decision. I'm on a Zoom call or FaceTime call with a good friend, one of our pastors here, and I'm just struggling. And we get done, it's a conference call, and everybody else drops off, and he sees me, and he knows me. He's one of the ones I've allowed into my life to influence me. And he looks at me and says, you're not alone. And it was incredible. I wasn't hearing the voice of God, but I was hearing the voice of God through him. And in that moment, he says, you're not alone. God's got this, and he's going to get us through this. That created faith within me, because he took the step of faith to influence me, to encourage me, and I surrounded myself by leveraging my life, purposely leveraging, bringing people into my life who can speak to me. It gave me the faith to say, you're right, God can do this. And in that moment, things begin to turn around. I've never heard the audible voice of God. Listen, if I heard God speak, I'd probably die from a heart attack. I've never heard an audible voice of God like the thunder at times you hear around me right now. I've never heard that. But what I have heard the voice of God through other people. I've heard the Spirit speak through people to encourage me, to rise up faith within me. This is how faith grows. Faith has to be influenced by other people, and this is where it begins to grow. So who's influenced you to grow like this? Who? Who's there for you? And so now they're kind of influenced. They're kind of pumped up again, right? Okay, let's go. God can do this. God can do this. God can do this. But now they're stuck in the situation. They really don't know what to do. You see, it's one thing to have inspiration. We can do this. It's another thing to have the inspiration and actually begin to apply it to your life, actually begin to do it. So not only do you need faith that grows through influence, write this down. This is why we're better together. This is why we gather together, because courage moves through encouragement. In order for you to move with courage, you need encouragement. That's how God designed it. God designed you to live with the encouragement of other people, and it's an encouragement that allows you to go forward. And so many of you are going, well, I have no one to encourage me. Okay, well, who have you invited into your life to actually be the encourager? Who have you invited into your life? Who have you intentionally begun to allow into your life to influence you so they can give you the encouragement to actually begin to encourage you? Because now, Jonathan, the armor bearer, they have this desire. Come on, let's go. God can do this. Come on, I'm with you. But then they look at the obstacle and go, how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? This is our question, isn't it? How do I do this? How do I remain single and try to find somebody to marry in a pandemic? How do I do this? How do I parent kids when things are going crazy all around me? How do I continue to let my marriage thrive with everything in me is just dying? How do I do this? How do I actually live in the fullness that God has for me? How? You see, it's not the inspiration, it's the application that's the point. And this is where we get stuck. But I want you to show this how they began to process this with each other. Look at verse 8. So Jonathan said, well, come on then. And he begins to process with the armor bearer, and they begin to talk about the strategy, the steps that they can begin to take to go forward. So he says, we're going to cross over towards them, and we're going to let them see us, which I think the armor bearer goes, what? Yeah, I thought the strategy was we would hide from them. And Jonathan says, no, what if we let them see us? And if they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we'll stay where we are. We'll stay there and we'll not go up to them. But if they say, come on up, come on, you want to fight? Let's fight. Come on up to us. We will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands. So both of them, I love this, both of them, not just Jonathan, both of them. Because I believe in this moment, if the armor bearer said, no, this is crazy, Jonathan, I'm out of here, I think Jonathan would have been stuck in his fear and never moved forward. But they both said, we're in this together. Let's go. We got our plan. Now let's do it. We got our strategy. Now let's do it. We know what God is telling us to do. Now let's do it. Now let's do it. Shout. Now let's do it. That's the hard part. Now let's do it. So it says, and so both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. Come on, there's those fearful, isolated, depressed people. Now they're finally climbing out of their holes. And the men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, come on up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. I love that verse. I'll teach you a lesson. And Jonathan said, okay, let me show you the lesson. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, let's go. Let's climb up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of the Israel. We're going to do this together. Let's go all the way to the end. And so together, Jonathan climbed up using his hands and using his feet, and his armor bearer was right behind him. The armor bearer is going, I'm with you. I'm with you. Come on, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. This might take a while, but I'm with you. And imagine the vulnerability. I mean, they're climbing up the thorns in the slidey areas, and the whole time they're making themselves vulnerable to each other and to the army in front of them. They're going, come on, we're in this together. Our God got this. And it says the Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. They were in this together, and they won the victory because God was alive and God was well in this. In this whole text, not one time does God speak, but God speaks. He speaks through the power of these two men who are opening themselves up to encourage each other and to gather together in order to go forward in the things that God has for them. You see, courage is looking at what's going on and saying, now what? Now what do we do? But not just strategizing and coming up with some steps, but actually begin to apply them, to actually do them in your life. Courage is not just having the idea. Just because you have the idea to love doesn't mean you're loving. Just because you have the idea that, hey, I'm going to be radical in my faith doesn't mean you're radical in your faith. Application is everything. It's applying what you know to the life that you're living. And what you need in order to live in application, what you need in order to have the courage to actually move forward in the things that God has for you, is you need someone there with you saying, we got this together, let's go. You need someone to help you process, how do I deal with this? How do I go through this? How do I work through this? You need someone to help process this with, and then when you come up with the action steps, when you come up with a plan to say, well, come on, I need the courage with you, and let's go and forth this and together. You need someone in the middle of your addiction to stand there with and go, hey, what are some steps we can begin to take to overcome this addiction? And it might take 3 months, it might take 3 years, but I want you to know this. I'm in here with you and we're going to fight with this together. You need people to surround you that encourage you, that actually gives you the courage to be the man of God, the woman of God that you need to be. This is why we gather together. This is why we come together, because we need people pouring into us and we need to pour into other people, because that's what gives us the ability to actually apply what we know, because it's never about just knowing truth. It's about applying that truth to the situations we are at. So Jonathan says, I know that God can do the impossible, whether it's 1 or whether it's 300. I know my God can do things through few or the many. And so if we're together, us two, and God is with us, we can overcome the whole entire army. Let's go. But it took the courage of both of them fighting with each other to make it happen. This is the reality of why we do life together, why it's so important to be in community, so that you can have people that are there with you. The writer of Hebrews writes this, one of my favorite verses. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 12 says, see to it, brothers and sisters. See to it that what? That none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. What turns you away from God is when you begin to trust in what you see more than what God says. So what's going to give you the ability to stay faithful to what God says and begin to actually do it in your life? But encourage one another daily, not just weekly, daily. See, you need people in your life that are speaking to you more than me. You need people that are coming alongside of you and encouraging you to keep going in the things that God has called you to do. And so encourage one another daily. The word actually encourage means to exhort, to strongly call out, to encourage each other, call attention to, come alongside of and say, let's go. I'm in this with you. Let's go. I'm in this with you. God's got this. Just like Jonathan. God's got this. Encourage one another as long as it's called today. So why? So that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. The way that sin begins to produce in your life and begins to wreck your life is because it deceives you. And this is why it's so important to have people who are with you so that you don't hurt you. Some of the greatest decisions I've made in my life that have hurt me have come from the decisions that I've made in my mind about me. When you surround yourself with only you live in only your thoughts and your minds. And people will look at you and they will think what you're doing out of fear is wise. People looked at Saul and thought, well, he's being wise. He's hiding. Jonathan was the only one who says, it's wise not to hide. It's wise to go forth in faith. I don't have to live in fear. But they were together, and through together, they were able to process this, think through this, talk about this, and actually begin to do it. This is why community is such a big deal. This is why it's so important. It's not about what you know, but it's about what you do with what you know. Are you applying it? We all need help. When I first became a believer, I was loving Jesus. And I remember in my college years, God really began to get a hold of my life and my heart. And for the first time in my life, I finally began to say, God, I surrender. I surrender. God, I have all my dreams. I have all my wishes. I surrender. And I thought surrendering was the hard part. But when I began to surrender and began to walk in the things that God had for me, I began to see this was going to be tough because there was things that I began to have to confront that I didn't want to confront. There was some issues deep in my life, addiction issues, struggle issues. There was things that I had begun to allow to escape to instead of turning to God. And God had to confront those things. And it was hard. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't do this on my own. And so as a college student, I began to say, God, you made me for a community. We're stronger together. That's why we gather. And I began to invite some people into my life, and we began to just do life together. And so I had some men into my life who began to help me, point me in the right direction I needed to go. I needed men in my life when I said, hey, I met this girl in English Comp 101 and she's like hot. I mean, like hot. And guess what, guys? Guess what? She's by herself in her apartment tonight and her friends are gone and she invited me over to study English and we're going to read poetry to each other. What could go wrong? And I need some bros to go, whoa, 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 whoa. Probably not wise for you to enter into that situation right now. Probably not wise because you're not going to think clearly and you'll begin to live off lust instead of the very thing that God has called you to do. I needed people in my life to go, hey, you need to fight for what you're really after. You need to fight hard for the things that God has called you to do. You needed to fight against some of the anger issues. I needed some people in my life because so many times in my life, what I would do is when people would irritate me or tick me off, I would just write them off of my life and I would run away from them. And I needed some people in my life to begin to say, hey, we're going to do this, but we're going to have to confront some of the anger issues you have and begin to address the issues instead of masking the issues and begin to do it. I needed some people in my life who, when I felt like giving up, when I was struggling with pornography, when I was struggling with alcohol, when I was struggling with those things, to come alongside of me and say, hey, we're in this together. Come on, God's got this and he's got you. That's what allowed me to go forward. And so when I met my wife, I realized the power of gathering together, having other people pour into your life. And when I got married, our first couple of years were rocky. Our first couple of years that I felt like we weren't going to make it past year 2. I thought year 1, it was okay. Year 2, got a little rocky. Year 3, I was ready for divorce. And I'm going, God, this isn't right. I'm struggling. And we knew very early on, though, if we wanted to survive some of the complexities of marriage, we need to invite some people into our life to help sit us down and influence us in the things that God has for us. And so we intentionally brought people into our life to begin to encourage us to have the courage to begin to address some of the issues that we didn't want to address in our marriage. I needed people to speak faith into me to help me. So very early on, it gave us a reason to keep going. And the lessons that we learned by living community helped us become better in our marriage. We weren't facing this alone. When I became a father, I struggled being a dad. I had an incredible dad. I mean, my dad is amazing. I love you, Pops. He's amazing. And I thought, there's no way I could be a dad like my dad was. He was just extreme. He was incredible. He was beautiful. He was a wonderful dad. And I struggled because I said, God, how can I be a dad? I'm not like my dad. And I began to have, we began to have kids. And I thought I knew everything about parenting until I had kids. I thought I could parent every kid in the world till I had my own kids. And it was a struggle. And so I was struggling with this, and I began to intentionally invite some people into my life, some other men to help teach me, help be there for me, to encourage me, to apply what I knew in my life, to actually be the man of God that I needed to be, to be the dad I needed to be. And as I struggled in being a pastor, I invite people into my life who help me, who I process things with, to encourage. This is why we have some of the greatest teams that we have at our Journey locations and all that we do at the Journey, because we do things in the context of teams. We do things of encouraging each other, living life together. We are family. This isn't a show. We love each other and we love you, and this is why it spreads to all of our locations. This is why we do what we do. This is why we want you to be in a community of believers, because you need people who speak faith into you. So how do you do that? How do you do it? Everything we do at The Journey, we do to help put you into some form of connection with someone else. From everything from our teal team of serving, from everything we do, we want you to live life with someone else. The primary way, though, that we really begin to invest in and encourage you to create the environment to help you take steps of faith to be in community is through our groups ministry. And every year at this time, we have what we call Group Link. And Group Link is just a small environment that we invite you into to help you connect with people who can begin to influence you and encourage you to live with the courage that God has for you. It allows you to be with a group of people who, when you hear the message, actually take the message and begin to apply it. You see, I realize that I can inspire you, but inspiration doesn't change people. Inspiration takes you to the cliff and go, wow, perhaps. You need a group of people who are around you, who are intentionally influencing you to go forward in what God has called you to do. You were never meant to fight the battle alone. That's why we do what we do at The Journey and invite you into groups. We have groups from everything we do, from Journey kids, they're in groups. From Journey students, they're in groups. 6th grade boys with 6th grade boys, 6th grade girls with 6th grade girls. Seniors, it's incredible what we do for groups. If you are single, we have single groups. If you're married, we have married groups. If you are older married groups, younger married groups, we have groups all over. All it takes is you just taking a step of faith into a group. As your pastor, I know that if you're not in a community, if you are not in some form of group, you're going to struggle in your faith. You're going to struggle. And I don't want that for you. And so this year, as we launch Group Link, we're doing it completely different. No matter if you're watching online or you're in one of our location in-person gathering, we want you to take a step into Group Link. Group Link is going to be a digital environment for you to take a step of faith in. But you still have to take the step. Come on. Are you tired of being lonely? Are you tired of living in isolation? Are you tired of living in fear? Are you tired of giving up on the life that God has for you and the greatness and the immeasurably more that God has for you? If you are dissatisfied and feel stuck, you have to begin to say, let's go. Let's go. How do you do that? Take a step into Group Link.